really this is all about transformation, right? This is what we're seeing across many sort of subsectors within the industry. I think it'd be interesting to sort of talk about very briefly sort of some of the main drivers of this transformation. Nick, what do you feel that those are right now?
I think some of the three main groups of drivers, some of them have always been there, but there are particular reasons why they're coming into particular focus now. So I'd say the first group of drivers are financial. So the good news is that no one's going to be asking businesses to do things that don't make financial sense. And by that I mean that clearly there were good, sound business reasons for people to take the offshoring decisions in the first place. They needed those lower unit costs. But as Luke mentioned, there are obviously big financial downsides to that, and people have perhaps become more aware of the balance between those, with huge amounts of wastage and stock being generated. So that there are financial downsides to the offshoring strategy. The second group of drivers, I would say, is around sustainability, which again, Luke mentioned, but again, they've always been there, but I think it's be fair to say that they're much more in focus now because consumers and shareholders are forcing big brand owners to focus on this issue. We don't need to go into it. Everyone is aware of the figures. The global textile industry's performance is horrible in terms of sustainability. And I think that businesses are now being forced to focus on that. And if we look at the positive side, they're being rewarded by their consumers when they do successfully focus on that.
There's really been much reform within the industry, and yet consumer behaviour has changed so much. And the industry is challenged now by design diversity, a constant need for newness, a constant need to keep replenishing collections at great speed, and that has put huge pressure on the system. As Nick said, when you're ordering large quantities from abroad, it's very difficult to move those at speed and to deliver the right product at the right time. And I think, that's one of the main reasons currently that the fashion industry has a poor reputation for landfill, really. We are still producing far too much waste and need to take absolute control of what we make right at the very beginning.
I think my personal thinking is that this is going to go even further nowadays, because people they don't know the forecast today, how much or what you are going to sell in the store next year. People doesn't know what we are seeing today is that we are already starting to present our winter 21. So people doesn't know, is not able to do the forecast of what is going to happen with summer. They need to go to get rid of all the stock for nothing, which goes against the sustainable purposes that everyone has today, because everyone is taking memberships of different organizations and different actions to control to monitor the sustainability and to be more sustainable. So it's a little bit of certainty, and then we see that the technology and so we were saying will help to do, we think, that shorter productions.
Yeah. It's interesting, that contrast right now between us all having this sort of massive focus on being more sustainable, yet the sort of stark realization that so many garments have been produced because they were planned last year, and it's already all happened, and we just kind of have to forget about 2020 in regard. And it's quite a strange contrast there. Let's talk more about the future and forget 2020 and think, all right, well, what can we do? What tools and what processes can we implement now to support this transformation? Because it's not a short-term thing, it is a very long-term thing. Debbie, I'm going to come to you first on that. What are some of the things that we can start doing to support this transformation?
I think we have to start moving towards digitizing the entire supply chain wherever you can, subject to your own business model. Implement those changes, whether you can do it in one whole line or gradually implement those changes. And from a design perspective, the most important thing there is that to make sure that you always design the product correctly right at the very beginning. So you become more acutely aware of the issues of sustainability, and you design them into the actual product. So you are creating hybrid design too, depending on whether you're working directly with a mill or whether you're working directly as a freelance designer. And don't forget, so much of our industry now is also freelance. So it's really important that from the design perspective, designers are creating patterns and prints in the right format so that they can be utilized for twin production. And I think that's going to be a huge part of the future. I think we are going to see a massive swing towards reshoring or nearshoring. And in order to do that, you have to have created the product correctly right at the very beginning. So, I'm not just talking about, it's a whole suite of technologies, really, whether you're creating the pattern or the print, preparing the print for digital print, making sure you're embedding color. Color is one of the most important parts of this journey. It's so important. You get the color wrong at the beginning, you're going to produce far too many samples, which is creating waste. And then in a production environment, once you start talking about big rotary machines, or equally, the bolt machines, digital machines printing at 90 square meters a minute, you're creating a lot of waste if you do not control color, and a good professional designer with a great expertise using fantastic software can do that right from the very beginning. But it's a discipline we have to put back into the system. I think many years ago, using other technologies, we could get a little bit lazy about that. And digital is kind of seen as a really easy process, drag and drop, press a button. But digital textiles is textiles. There's a lot under the hood, and there's a lot of technology and a lot of thought and process. And we have to get back to doing that really very well from the beginning and priming that product for a really smooth, sustainable production workflow.
Here what we have is that the headquarters, we are in London. Our facilities and our printing facilities that we own, it's in Como in Italy. So that means that here you have already the first challenge, that is the design team is separated of the production team. So it's what David was saying, that you need a very straightforward, very clear line of working in terms of color that everyone follows from the start, from the beginning, till the production, and then till the end consumer, so till the brand. Lucky for us is what we were saying earlier. The technology to us, it helps, and then we are lucky that everyone is using the same software, the same technology in the different parts of the world. So this always helps, and then is what David was saying, the color management. To be able nowadays to have programs that you have the same color in the screen that you have it afterwards in the fabric or in the cut, in the paper, always there is. It's not so straightforward. There are always some things to tune. It helps, and it's much better than 20 years ago when all this didn't exist, and then you have everything to do it by hand. So just how we see it, and we are pretty succeeding.
Nick, would you come in on also, I'd like you to ask about sort of the difference between sort of digital and analog here, and trying to find this sort of consistent colour management on both of those?
Yeah, I was going to pick up. I mean, Liberty is perhaps not the best case because it's to discuss as a case study, because they're far more advanced in that they're working with. I think that's the way of the future, because I think whether you don't necessarily have to own your production facilities in the future, but I think that we'll see brand owners taking a much greater degree of responsibility, which will mean working with a smaller number probably, and having a much closer technical relationship with their suppliers, even if they don't own them, rather than, some of them currently working with thousands of suppliers and just switching between them from day to day on the basis of presumably primarily price, which precludes any degree of control or responsibility. And I think that the sustainability lobby is now sort of saying to them, you can't get away with that anymore. You actually, Mr. Brand Owner, you are actually responsible, in inverted commas, for the waste and the damage being done by some of those suppliers. But in the end, I think, as Alex was saying when I spoke to him the other day, you would say, Alex, in the end, it all comes down to affordability, doesn't it?
Yes. At the end, I think that what happens nowadays is that in the market there is a pressure for price, and then people need to understand that it's not the same price to be sustainable than not to be sustainable, than to have a certain quality than not to have it. So obviously this is what people needs to teach the market, needs to teach the consumer, and then we believe on it, and then we succeed on it. But it's true that it's still too much, a lot of work to be done on that, because the end consumer nowadays is starting to be sustainable, to turn around the hand tag and check where it's produced, how it's produced. Nowadays you see in social media, it's many news coming on in terms of here in UK with some brands that had issues in terms of supply chain. There's something going on, and people need to start to be taking care of it.
So, do we feel now that then the responsibility of the behaviour of the suppliers is becoming more and more on the brands and retailers?
I think it is, yeah.
Well, if you ask to us, it's true that in Liberty Group we are more and more monitored in terms of what is in my side, from the fabric side, from the where we produce, where we source, what kind of cotton we source, where technology we use, and then all the materials that we produce. Our factory in Italy, we can say that it's really monitored on that. Also, as a retailer, we are facing that we are part of 2 or 3 organizations that they check how we sell, what are the products that we trade, and then obviously, and this is something that we have seen growing the last 12 months, and I think that in the next 12, it's going to grow exponentially. So I think that people is taking care of, and then is caring of, and then I think it's going to be the next challenge for everyone.
I mean, a lot of big companies now have a named person at parent board level whose title is something like sustainability or environmental director, whose job is to report to the shareholders every year on the progress that business has made in this area. So they can't do nothing now. They have to start taking responsibility, don't they?
Yes, I have to say that it was like this, Nick. Nowadays, you have one CEO, and then in one side it has the legal director, and then in the other side it has the director of social corporate responsibility, and then you don't know who of each one has more empowerment today for them to take the correct decision, because everything is considered. Yes.
One of the measures that our customers frequently adopt, because it's a figure that they are able to access historically, is basically the number of attempts it takes them on an analog press to match the digital target. In other words, how many times did they get it wrong and throw it away before they got it right? And that number, obviously it varies hugely according to how top end how difficult the substrate is, where the printing mill is. But I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say that number can be as high as 30 attempts to get it right, average. And so a business that is currently taking an average of 30 attempts to get something right, if they can get it down to 15, it still sounds pretty awful, but they've made a huge improvement. So whereas the laminate producers that I'm talking about are probably averaging less than 2 for that figure. So it's between 1 and 2, 1.5 is achievable for them. Textiles aren't going to get to that. But if they can get from 30 down to 20 and then down to 10 and maybe down to 5, that is a hell of a lot of waste. So I don't think a lot of people look at it, you talk to anyone manufacturing and they will say, well, it can't work because we have so many variables in the apparel and fashion industry. And yes, it's true. At the moment, it probably couldn't work because the worst of the variables is they have too many suppliers and they don't have any control over them. But if that starts to narrow down, I believe that, they won't get to perfection. They won't have the total control that they can say it's going down for every product line. It's going down exactly that product line. I've already got the data for that substrate using that production line. Therefore, I might expect to get it right first time or second time. But if they can get from 30 down to 15, down to 10, down to 5, it's an incremental process. And so I don't think people should let the apparent or perhaps obvious inability to hit perfection put them off trying to improve.
There's a question here from Richard, who sort of makes the point really that the point of sale demand, the prices of analog are not pulling through the value add of the higher prices of digital, saying that basically all of his manufacturers that he works with, they can't raise their prices even a quarter of a dollar. That's what they say, at least. So saying that the point of sale demand, the prices of analog are not pulling through the value for digital. He goes on to make the question, what steps are you contemplating to coach designers with your software to design into the collection, as we were talking about earlier on, Debbie? Digital value add that will pull through the solutions of digital, because he feels that consumers currently have sort of zero awareness of this digital value add. Does that all make sense? So in terms of feeling like consumers need to have the designers design into the collection, and that will then feed through, trickle down into people using digital printing more than analog to justify the prices. Debbie, would you come in on that?
I think over time this problem will actually disappear. I think, it's, if you, as Nick was saying before, you're talking between 4 and 6 or 7% into digital. It's about economies of scale. I think once you see the adoption within this industry start to build and build and build, the ink prices will start to level off. They've already moved massively in the last 5 or 6 years. So you'll start to see, do you agree, Alex? You'll start to see the marketplace start to balance out, and that's when you'll see the massive adoption and the big, huge shift over to digital technologies, because they are very sustainable, green, lots and lots and lots of issues, not greedy on energy, save a huge amount of electricity, etc., compared to analog productions.
But I think on an optimistic note, I think perhaps there's the demographics and the long-term trend is perhaps moving in the right direction. In that, I listen to my children, and I think there is a genuine movement away from the throwaway culture, and I wouldn't be surprised if the trend in apparel consumption in, let's say, the first world, in Europe and North America for sure, is over time. I don't know how fast it'll happen, but I think we could see lower volume, so less units consumed, but of higher quality and at higher price, crucially for Alex and the person who asked the question. Yeah, the higher price is obviously, are the young people prepared to pay a bit more for something which they know is sustainably produced, but also is probably of better quality, will last longer, is going to be recycled, whatever. And I think probably in the longer term, the answer is to that question, I would say, listening to the young people I talk to, is probably yes.